Now, I was just up at the coffee shop working for a couple hours, and when I was walking back to the bike, I was surprised to see that there was actually a noticeable amount of slack already on the chain. I've only got 400 miles on this bike, but after some quick searching online, I came to discover that the stock chain that comes on the Trail 125 is meh. So it shouldn't surprise me too much that I need to make an adjustment. So that's what I'm gonna do today. I'm just gonna do a quick adjustment on the chain and get it back to within spec. So before we get started, we obviously need to know what the recommended spec is for the Freeplay on the chain. Well, thankfully, on the chain guard, there's a handy dandy little chart that tells us right here, Freeplay is 30 millimeters or 1 1/4 inches. So let's see how far we are off from that recommended spec. All we're gonna need for this task is a few wrenches, or spanners if you prefer. I've got a 19, a 14, a 12, and a 10. So what I've done here is I've just run a standard measuring tape behind the chain that conveniently has both US inches as well as metric centimeters on it. I'm gonna be using the metric side to measure the displacement. Now from my particular angle right here, it looks like the top of the chain is at about 25.5 centimeters or 255 millimeters. All I'm going to do is I'm gonna push up and displace that part of the chain as high as it will go. And now I'm reading 30.5 or 305 millimeters. So that means the total displacement is 50 millimeters, which is right at the upper limit of what Honda recommends. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna adjust it so that it's back in spec at 30 millimeters. Now, before we get started with loosening the axle and making the adjustment, we need to get a reference point of where we are on the tension. Thankfully, Honda gives us these nice indicator markers at the end of the swing arm. So let's take a look and see how many are visible. So if you look, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and it just sort of stops on 5. With that marked, let's go ahead and loosen the axle. So that means we're gonna need a 14 mil wrench on the chain side and a 19 mil wrench on the opposite side. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that we've loosened the axle, we're gonna go ahead and we're going to loosen this outermost bolt that's locking everything in place. So let's do that with the 10 mil wrench. Ooh, that was in there nice and tight. Gonna do the same to the other side. Now that we've got everything loosened up, it's time to make the actual chain adjustment. We do this by tightening the inner bolt at the end of the swing arm. And if you watch while I do that, you should actually see the chain start to tighten up. So here's the chain. With its too much slack, let's tighten this up a little bit. The other thing I'm being very careful of is to make sure I keep this little end cap aligned while I tighten things. We just don't want to have there be any sort of slack in there. All right, so I've given it a few turns. The chain has come up quite a bit. If I do a really quick check from here, we are right at about the slack we need to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. And then I'm gonna go on the other side and make sure I've tightened it up to the exact same position so that the wheel is true and straight. So for reference, here's what we're looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little space. And over here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little space. All right, now I'm pretty happy with this adjustment. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just going to make sure this little end cap is lined up correctly, and then I'm just gonna screw this secondary bolt in to sort of lock it into place. Just hand tighten for now. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna do the same to the other side. The last thing we wanna do is just sort of lock everything in place. The way we do that is we simply lock the outer bolt to the inner bolt, just like you would on a bicycle. So we're gonna put the 12 on the inner bolt, and then we're going to just lock that outer bolt as tight as we can. Make sure that looks good. Do the same on the other side. So I'm pretty happy with that. Everything seems tightened up pretty good. So the last step is to tighten the axle. Make sure everything is nice and snug. It's true, everything looks straight. Check the Freeplay one last time, make sure it's in spec, and then take it out for a test ride. Make sure it's not wobbly or doing anything weird. So let's tighten up the axle. Now I forgot to mention that the torque spec for the axle is 59 newton meters or 44 foot-pounds. So I do have my torque wrench, and I'm gonna go ahead and torque it up to spec. One last check to make sure everything's snug. Good. All right, everything looks good. Everything seems to look good, so let's just check that Freeplay one last time. All right, so now that it's all done, I'm just gonna do one last check on the chain Freeplay. And from my particular angle looking down right here, I'm right at 26 or 260 millimeters. If I displace it up, it's right at 29 or 290, giving us 30 millimeters of Freeplay, right where we're supposed to be. So with that, let's go take it for a little test drive and make sure everything feels right. And otherwise, the adjustment is done. All right, back from my test ride. I'm happy to report that everything ran great. The bike felt normal, no wobbliness or weirdness. The tire is true. Everything is great. The Freeplay is exactly 30 millimeters where it's supposed to be, so calling it an end to this little maintenance adjustment. So nothing left to do now but go back to work. So I think my secret might be partially out. You see, I love doing videos like this because I love passing on whatever knowledge I can to all of you out there, but also because it gets me away from work for 30 minutes. But seriously, I do need to get back in and get back to work. So thanks so much. I hope this was helpful. Take care, be safe. I'll see you in the next video. So I forgot to mention there is one last check you can do just to make sure both sides are aligned correctly, and that is to measure the remaining portion of the adjustment bolt. So here you can see I've got 1.85 centimeters. Looking at the other side, we also have 1.85 centimeters.